All right, let's get right into it. We all like to think we're in the driver's seat when it comes to how we feel about technology. But what if our eyes are telling a totally different story? Today, we are breaking down a really fascinating new study that shows the secret truth our gaze reveals about our trust in robots.
I mean, it seems like a pretty simple question, doesn't it? You could just ask them. But as scientists are finding out, the real answer is way more complicated and, honestly, a lot more interesting than a simple yes or no.
And this really gets to the heart of the problem. See, on one hand, you've got what people say, their subjective opinion, right? It's usually a reflection after the fact. And let's be honest, it can be biased. But on the other hand, you've got these objective clues our bodies are giving off, real-time, unspoken data that might just be telling the actual story.
So this leads us to the central challenge for anyone designing these things. How in the world do you measure something as squishy and personal as trust, especially when it's changing from one moment to the next? Here's the deal with just asking somebody. First off, making someone stop what they're doing to fill out a survey, it's intrusive. It completely breaks the flow. Second, it's not a live feed of their feelings. It's a memory. And finally, we're not always the best at reading our own minds. We might not even be consciously aware of how our trust is going up or down.
So, to get around all these issues, researchers designed this really clever experiment. They wanted to see if they could find a better, more objective way to watch trust as it's built, as it gets broken, and maybe, just maybe, as it gets repaired.
So picture this. The setup was pretty straightforward. They had 38 people doing a simple gear assembly task, and their partner for this job, a collaborative robot or a cobot whose whole purpose was to hand them the right parts. A classic human-robot team-up.
Okay, now here is where it gets really interesting. They structured this thing in 4 distinct phases. First, you have the trust-building phases, where the robot is just a perfect teammate, 100% reliable, gets everything right. But then comes the twist, the trust breach. The robot's reliability suddenly tanks, and that's followed by a recovery phase, just to see what happens next.
So let's zoom in on that one crucial moment, the trust breach. What does it actually look like when a machine you've learned to count on suddenly starts letting you down?
The robot didn't just, shut down. No. It started making these very specific, kind of unnerving mistakes. It would change speed all of a sudden, it would bring the wrong parts, and it would even creep into the human's personal workspace. It was designed to be unreliable in a way you couldn't miss.
Now, the first result was exactly what you'd think. When the researchers asked people, hey, how much do you trust this robot now? Well, their self-reported trust levels fell off a cliff. No big surprise there.
And the second result was also pretty predictable. As people's trust went down, the amount of time they spent physically watching the robot, what the scientists called the fixation count, went way, way up. Of course, they were keeping a much closer eye on their flaky new partner.
Okay, so let's be clear. The basic story was simple. The robot messed up, people said I trust it less, and their eyes showed they were watching it more. Straightforward, right? But that is not where the real story is.
The most incredible discoveries were actually hidden in the much subtler parts of the data, in those moments where people said nothing had changed at all.
And this is the key question, isn't it? What was actually going on during those really subtle phases, like when trust was just getting stronger, or during the so-called recovery phase? The surveys showed absolutely no change. People weren't reporting anything different. But were their eyes telling another story?
To find out, the researchers had to dig deeper than just what people looked at. They used more advanced metrics. Take gaze entropy, for instance. It's a really cool concept. It basically measures how predictable or random your scanning patterns are. If you have high entropy, your eyes are darting all over the place. Low entropy, you're way more focused.
And this, right here, is where the study's biggest bombshell dropped. During those phases where the surveys were totally silent, the gaze data showed that men and women were showing their trust in completely different unspoken ways. For men, it showed up as shorter fixation durations, basically quick, confident glances. They trusted the robot, so they didn't need to stare. Meanwhile, women showed trust through lower gaze entropy. Their attention became way more focused, less scattered, a clear signal that they weren't worried.
So let that sink in for a second. Our eyes were revealing these subtle shifts in trust that we weren't even consciously aware of ourselves. These patterns were totally invisible to the old-school surveys, but they were crystal clear in the gaze data.
So, what does this all mean for how we're going to interact with technology in the future? I mean, what are the real-world implications of being able to read these unspoken cues?
Well, just look at the final scorecard. The self-reports, they caught the obvious breakdown. Heart rate monitors, funnily enough, caught basically nothing. But the detailed eye tracking metrics, they caught everything. The big failure and all the subtle, hidden stuff about how trust gets built and repaired.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The researchers themselves put it perfectly. They said eye tracking isn't just some cool new tool. It could actually complement or even replace the old way of doing things to truly understand our relationship with machines.
So, why does this matter to you and me? Well, imagine robots that can literally sense when you're starting to lose trust and then change what they're doing to reassure you. We're talking about building safer, more efficient human-robot teams and designing technology that gets us on an almost subconscious level. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. We've just seen that our gaze can completely give away our trust in a robot. So, what other hidden truths about our thoughts, our feelings, and our intentions are we broadcasting to the world every single time we look at something?